Hey, remember how everyone used to say that Marvel has a villain problem? That was kind of the running joke until at least Phase 3, and while we're not here to re-litigate old arguments, you can kinda see where those detractors were coming from. But with the snap of his fingers, a certain purple titan killed that debate for good. Thanos was truly a bad guy for the ages, and his absence leaves a major villain-shaped gap in the MCU. In this video, we're gonna see who might be waiting in the wings to fill that gap. The much-delayed Black Widow will finally be with us in July, and we know that the movie's main antagonist will be Taskmaster. Is Taskmaster a Thanos-level threat? Not by any means. He's not going to be wiping out half the universe, but he's the perfect foil for Black Widow, a non-superpowered hero with formidable martial arts abilities. Taskmaster's gimmick is his photographic reflexes. Just by observing, he can mimic any fighting style and turn it against its user. Oh, and on top of that, he's a skilled tactician and a master of weapons. Natasha's gonna have her work cut out for her with this guy. The reveal of the Mandarin in Iron Man 3 was, shall we say, controversial. For every fan who thought that it was an amusing subversion of expectations, there was someone who thought Ben Kingsley's drunken British thespian was an insult to a formidable Marvel villain. Well, those latter fans have Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings to look forward to, because Marvel has confirmed that the movie's primary antagonist will be the actual, literal Mandarin. And what's more, he'll be played by legendary Hong Kong actor Tony Leung. In the comics, the Mandarin is a genius scientist and martial artist, and possesses 10 rings that give him extraordinary powers. We'd be very surprised if this guy was a one and done. At the very least, he'll probably appear in future Shang-Chi movies, but he could also quite easily become a recurring antagonist for the MCU as a whole. While Thor: The Dark World's rep might be slightly undeserved, it's mostly fine, you know? It does tend to feature in conversations about Marvel's villain problem, and yeah, fair enough, Malekith the Dark Elf was kind of a nothing bad guy. But Taika Waititi's Thor: Ragnarok was a different story, bringing us a fantastic take on Hela and a towering, malevolent Surtur the Fire Giant. Can Waititi do it again with Thor: Love and Thunder? Well, we think so, because this time he's bringing us Gore the God Butcher, a powerful, relentless, and vengeful alien hell-bent on murdering as many gods as he can get his hands on. We can't wait to see Christian Bale bring his customary intensity to this newer Marvel bad guy. The first Ant-Man and its sequel had what we'd call mid-tier villains, effective within their stories but not the most memorable. But all that could be set to change with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, as we've had confirmation that the movie will introduce none other than Kang the Conqueror. Who is Kang the Conqueror? How long have you got? A regular opponent of both the Fantastic Four and the Avengers, Kang is a time-traveling warlord who uses advanced 40th century technology to lay waste to his enemies. We would be surprised if his whole backstory made it into the movie, as it's pretty convoluted, including multiple potential origins and alternate future variations. But his time-traveling villainy will certainly add an intriguing new wrinkle to Ant-Man's quantum shenanigans. We'd also put money on Kang's appearance connecting to the recently announced Fantastic Four movie in some way. He might even return for that movie. After all, anything's possible with time travel. These next villains may sound like a Riot Girl band from the 80s, but don't let that fool you. The Deviants, who have been confirmed for the upcoming Eternals movie, are a formidable and vicious crew, not to mention some of the more visually interesting antagonists we will have seen in the MCU, which actually still sounds like a Riot Girl band from the 80s. Created by Jack Kirby, they first appeared way back in the first issue of the Eternals, and they've been recurring villains ever since. Within Marvel mythology, they were created by the Celestials, part of the same genetic experimentation that created the Eternals. Each deviant has their own unique power. There's a shapeshifter, one who looks like a devil, some of them can fly, some of them have tentacles, it's a whole thing. We bet these guys are going to look pretty wild on screen. Again, not unlike a Riot Girl band from the 80s. Doctor Strange won't be diving into the multiverse of madness until next year, and we don't know many details about that movie's story at this point. We do know that Chiwetel Ejiofor will be returning as Carl Mordo, but we'd bet the time stone that there will be another bigger antagonist at play as well. Could this be the time to introduce Nightmare? Marvel have been fairly open that the Doctor Strange sequel will be their most overtly horror-inspired offering so far, and bringing on horror legend Sam Raimi to replace departing director Scott Derrickson would seem to support that. Although Scott Derrickson also did a bunch of horror movies before, it doesn't matter. If Marvel wanted to introduce a truly terrifying foe, Nightmare would seem to be their best bet. And now, from the sublime to the ridiculous. Let's be honest. MODOK is probably one of Marvel's sillier villains, at least when it comes to his appearance. A big ranting head and a floating chair, it's going to be a challenge to get that working effectively in live action, not to mention the fact that MODOK stands for Mental Organism Designed Only for Killing, which, yikes. But appearances aside, MODOK has long been a formidable foe for the Avengers with a genius-level intellect and powerful psychic abilities. It would be pretty fun to see him on the big screen. Of course, the big ol' head is about to star in his own comedy series on Hulu, so Marvel may not want to interfere with that for now. But they did manage to make us fall in love with a talking tree and a pissed-off raccoon, so we wouldn't bet against them finding a way to bring MODOK to life. Our dream casting? Bryan Cranston. And editor, you better put Bryan Cranston's head in that body. You better do it. Get in that Photoshop and you make Bryan Cranston as MODOK, okay? Alright? Thank you. There's a lot to squeeze into Spider-Man No Way Home. The fallout of Peter's unmasking at the end of Far From Home, multiverse shenanigans, characters from different Spider-Man continuities, a certain Doctor Strange. That doesn't leave a whole lot of space to introduce a new major antagonist. But we would be very surprised if Tom Holland's third solo Spider-Man joint doesn't at least hint at the future arrival of Norman Osborn. Of course, we've seen the Green Goblin face off against Tobey Maguire back in the Sam Raimi movies, but as one of Marvel's most malevolent recurring villains, it feels inevitable that he's going to be introduced in the MCU eventually. It's not really controversial to say that none of the previous Fantastic Four movies have exactly been classics. Two of them were okay, one of them was less than okay. And most egregiously, none of them did justice to Doctor Doom, one of Marvel's true A-list villains. A sorcerer, a technological genius, a master strategist, supreme leader of his own kingdom, Victor Von Doom is a gift of a character, a truly formidable, egotistical antagonist who has warped reality itself to his will in the comics. We can only hope that when he is finally introduced to the MCU, most likely in the forthcoming Fantastic Four reboot, that he is given the care and attention that a villain of his stature deserves. Because if anyone is going to be the next Thanos, it's the man in the iron mask over here. Now we're gonna stick with Marvel's first family for this final villain. You know, we can kinda understand why studios in 2007 thought that audiences weren't ready for a gigantic dude in a funny hat, flying through space, eating planets. Galactus is definitely one of the Marvel Universe's most out-there antagonists, a humongous, almost unknowable force of nature. But that being said, nothing justifies what we got in Rise of the Silver Surfer. A big cloud? Really? Of course, now audiences are much more open to big, bizarre comic book concepts, and Marvel Studios has shown that they are willing to get weird with it. Could we one day see a faithful adaptation of Galactus on our screens? We wouldn't bet against it. Of course, at this point in the life cycle of the MCU, Marvel can do pretty much anything they want. So once they've introduced Kang the Conqueror, is it too much to ask that they give us his mighty marsupial equivalent, Kangaroo the Conqueror?